Hello, and welcome back to Lacrim Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you're drawn to dark, haunting stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Just a quick note. The first 10 minutes will contain 3 ads, after which the entire video is completely ad-free, so you can relax and enjoy a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Now, settle in, clear your mind, let the outside world slip away, and let's begin. Story 1. I've been best friends with a girl I'll call Sarah for as long as I can remember. Our families have been close since before either of us were born, so we were basically raised together. She's 2 months older than me, which meant we ended up in the same classes almost every year. We're both 21 now, and until recently, Sarah was the most steady thing in my life. The kind of person you assume will always be there in the same shape, with the same laugh, the same habits, the same voice texting you at 2 a.m. because she found something ridiculous online. Sarah has always been the funny one, the charming one. She's social in a way I've never been. The type who can walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new friends and a dinner invite. She wore bright colors like she was daring the world to look at her. Reds, blues, loud patterns. I'm more the opposite. I keep to myself more, and my wardrobe is mostly dark and plain. Black jeans, dark hoodies, gray coats. Even when we were younger, she used to tease me and call me a storm cloud. But none of that ever mattered. If anything, it made us fit together better. She pulled me into things I would have avoided. I balanced her out when she got too reckless. I spent so much time tagging along on her plans that I stopped thinking of it as tagging along. It was just life. Sarah would come up with an idea, and somehow we'd end up doing it. Then, about a year ago, Sarah changed completely. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't like she drifted or grew up or got a new hobby. It was like someone flipped a switch, and the Sarah I'd known my whole life was suddenly off. Like she was still using Sarah's voice and Sarah's face, but the person behind her eyes had gotten lost. She called me one day, and the moment I picked up, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was flat, tense, like she was trying to hold herself together. "Hey, Sarah," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's up?" The voice on the other end was definitely hers, but she didn't respond the way Sarah normally would. No joke, no teasing. She went straight into questions like she was reading from a checklist. "Hey," she said, "this might sound off, but you're OP, right?" I actually laughed, because my first instinct was that she was setting up some kind of prank. Sarah loved messing with people, especially me, because I'm easy to throw off. "Yes," I said. "This is OP." "Okay," she said quickly. "That's good. That's good." Then she went quiet. Not like she was thinking of something funny to say, but like she was listening to something in the room with her, or like she was trying to get her breathing under control. "Sarah," I asked, "you okay?" She took a shaky breath and jumped to another question. "Do you remember inviting me to hang out at the park last week?" My smile faded. I remember you inviting me, yeah." "Me?" she said, like the word hurt. "I invited you, not the other way around?" "No," I said slowly. "Sarah, what is going on?" She didn't answer right away. The silence dragged on long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard her swallow. "Listen," she said, and her voice sounded thinner. Do you remember... Remember what? I asked. Do you remember Lucy being there? I frowned. Lucy? What Lucy? For a second, there was nothing. Then Sarah's voice rose suddenly, panicked. Oh, no. No, 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 no. My heart started beating hard for no good reason. Is this a prank? I asked. Come on. You know I'm not good at these. Lucy, she said, like she hadn't heard me. Don't tell me you don't know who Lucy is. You're joking, right? Please tell me you're messing with me. And then she started crying. Not quiet sniffles, full sobs like she'd been holding it in, and it finally broke through. I tried to calm her down, tried to get her to tell me what was happening. But it was like she couldn't get a grip. Her words came out jumbled between breaths. After a minute, she managed to say, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And then she hung up. I called her right back. She rejected it. I called again. Rejected. Then she texted me, please leave me alone until tomorrow. So I did, because what else could I do? But I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the call in my head, trying to figure out what Lucy was supposed to mean. I kept thinking about the sound of Sarah crying like that. I'd heard her cry before, but not like this. This wasn't a breakup or a fight with her parents. This sounded like fear. The next day, I dragged myself through my early shift at work on 3 hours of sleep. About an hour before I was done, Sarah texted me asking if I was free to talk. I told her I was working, but I could come by afterward. Her reply was immediate. Wait, you have a job? I stared at my phone like it had insulted me. Sarah knew where I worked. She'd dropped me off there before. She complained about my schedule. She teased me about the ugly uniform. There was no universe where she didn't know I had a job. After work, I went to her house. Both her parents worked late, so it was just the two of us. We sat in her living room, and the air between us felt wrong. The room looked the same, but she didn't. She was distant, guarded, like she was watching me for signs of something. Her clothes were completely different from her usual style. No bright colors, no cute accessories. She was wearing black sweatpants and a gray hoodie, plain and heavy. Her hair wasn't styled the way she normally did it either. She sat curled up, hugging her legs, staring at me with an intense focus that made my skin prickle. It was like she was studying my face, checking my hair, my posture, my clothes, like she was comparing me to someone else. I finally broke the silence because I couldn't take it anymore. Okay, I said. What was that yesterday? Did something happen? She hesitated, then spoke quietly. I think I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I narrowed my eyes, still trying to find the joke. What do you mean? Yesterday I took a nap, she said. When I woke up, things were different. My room, my clothes, this house. Everything. Everything was wrong. She adjusted her grip around her legs. Her eyes dropped to the carpet. Even you. You're healthy. Your hair's shorter. Your clothes are different, too. It's like we switched wardrobes, and it's driving me insane. I didn't know what to say. The only thing my brain could do was search for normal explanations. Stress, a breakdown, a prank, some kind of dissociation. I tried to keep my voice calm. Sarah, I said, leaning forward. It's okay, I'm here. I don't know what's happening, but maybe we should talk to your parents, or... She cut me off fast, raising her hand like she was stopping traffic. No, that won't work. They'll think I'm crazy. Her voice cracked on the word crazy, like she'd been hearing it in her head all night. And I can see it on your face, too. You think I'm crazy. OP, I'm not having some kind of crisis. I don't know how, but I think I woke up in a different reality. A different reality, I repeated, because I didn't have anything else. You know, she said urgently, like timeline shifting, multiverse theory. I just stared. She threw her hands up, suddenly angry, like my confusion was the last straw. Jesus, OP, we watched so many videos about this last summer. I went cold. Sarah hated swearing. Not disliked it, hated it. She used to scold people for saying, "Oh my God," too casually. And last summer, we hadn't watched any multiverse videos. Last summer, our families went to a beach resort together. She spent half the trip flirting with a Jamaican guy who worked at the bar, and she made me take photos of her accidentally walking past him. Dude, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We went to the beach last summer, with our families. Of course, she muttered like it confirmed something for her. She rubbed her forehead and forced herself to slow down. Okay. Well, what about the Mandela effect? That one I know, I said. It's when people remember things wrong, like shared false memories. Yes, she said quickly. So imagine that. But it's not one or two details. Imagine you wake up and everything in your life is off. Some things are close enough to be familiar, but even the familiar things have differences. And you're saying that happened to you, I said. Yes, she said. Her fingers dug into her sweatpants, so hard I could see the fabric pulling tight. It happened, and I need you to believe me. I took a breath. Sarah, I get what you're saying, but you have to understand you sound completely insane. She looked up so fast it startled me. I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me I look insane. So I did. And I saw something that made it hard to keep arguing. I recognized that look. Sarah had always been brave on the outside, but when she was really scared, when it was the kind of fear she couldn't joke her way out of, her eyes changed. She looked younger, like a kid who'd gotten separated from their parent in a crowd. Desperation, embarrassment, and real terror all pressed together. That look was there now. It was so familiar that it made my stomach twist. I didn't fully believe her in that moment, but I stopped dismissing her. There's a difference. I started asking questions the way you do when you're trying to understand something impossible without making the other person feel worse. We talked for hours. Sarah explained what she thought was her reality and what she was seeing in mine. She kept saying this timeline, like she'd stepped off a train onto the wrong platform. She told me about Lucy, who, she insisted, was our third best friend. She described inside jokes I'd never heard, memories I didn't share. She talked about Katie, someone I knew as a normal friend, but in Sarah's version, Katie was our enemy, the kind of person you avoid at all costs. She even brought up darker things, like a teacher from our high school, Mr. Lanster, a guy everyone liked, who in her reality had been arrested for dating a student. In my life, that never happened. Mr. Lanster was still teaching, still well-liked, still nothing but a name that came up when people talked about that one teacher who actually cared. Sarah asked me to fill in gaps, to tell her what happened here so she could blend in. She started keeping notes on her phone. She asked questions about events she said never happened to her, and she'd go pale when I answered. Some things made her laugh in a shaky way, like she was relieved. Other things made her stare at the wall like she was watching her life rearrange itself in her head. And as the weeks passed, something else happened that I didn't expect. My time with Sarah felt both familiar and new. Her taste in music changed. Her taste in clothes changed. Her mannerisms shifted. She stopped wearing bright colors completely and started dressing more like me. She was quieter, less social. She didn't want crowds. She didn't want strangers. She wanted predictable, safe spaces. In a horrible, guilty way, I found myself enjoying being with her more than I used to. Not because I loved her less before, but because it felt easier now, like we were finally on the same wavelength. That guilt sat heavy in my chest whenever I thought about it. Because even if this was the same Sarah, it also felt like it wasn't. And I hated what it said about me that I preferred this version. Then things got worse. Sarah started getting sick. At first it was small, headaches, nausea, exhaustion. She'd cancel plans and say she just needed sleep. But it didn't pass. It got heavier. She started losing weight. Her skin looked dull. Her eyes stayed tired. The more I saw her, the more dread I saw on her face, like she could feel her body failing and she didn't know how to stop it. Soon my routine included daily visits to the hospital. At first I was allowed to sit with her as long as I wanted. Then the rules tightened as her condition got worse. Shorter visits, more restrictions, more doctors in and out, more tests that never seemed to give clear answers. Every time I walked into her room, I tried to prepare myself for how she'd look, and it was never enough. Last week was the last time I saw her. She looked so frail that I kept thinking, she could die while I'm sitting here, while I'm talking about normal things like it matters. But she could still speak clearly. She was still herself enough to joke weakly, enough to squeeze my hand when I sat beside her. We talked for a while. I would feel the visit ending the way you can feel daylight fading, slow but certain. I was gathering my things, getting ready to leave, when Sarah suddenly said, "I have been cursed." I stopped. What? She didn't look at me when she said it. She stared at the white hospital sheets like they held answers. "I found out the truth," she whispered. "I've been cursed to die here, in a reality that isn't mine." I had never fully believed her story, but a part of me always wanted to, because the alternative was that my best friend was losing her mind, and I didn't know how to help. So I asked carefully, gently, trying not to sound like I was challenging her. "How did you come to that conclusion?" I said. "Yesterday," she said. "An old man came to visit." My stomach tightened. "An old man, like family?" "No," she said. "I don't know him," she swallowed. "He had kind eyes, like he felt sorry for me." "Did you tell the nurses?" I asked. "Did you tell anyone a stranger came in?" She shook her head. "No. Only you know about what happened to me. That's why it's weird." Her voice got softer, almost embarrassed. "But he said he knew." "Knew what?" I asked. "My situation," she said. "He said I was cursed by someone in my original reality. He said this reality can't sustain me. Like my body doesn't belong here." As she spoke, she refused to meet my gaze. She kept looking down, picking at the edge of the blanket with trembling fingers. "That's suspicious," I said. "What did he want? What did he offer?" Sarah inhaled slowly, like she was bracing herself. "He said he could undo it," she whispered. "He said he could Send me back before I die. A cold wave went through me because the words sounded like hope, but the tone didn't. It sounded like bait. And? I asked. How? He said it comes with a cost, she said. A cost I'm not sure I want to pay. What cost? I pushed, immediately regretting the sharpness in my voice. Sarah's fingers clenched hard in the sheets. I'll tell you later, she said. I need time to think. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. Not just the story, but the way she was saying it. Like she'd been warned. Like she was afraid of being overheard, even though the room was empty. But I didn't want to pressure her. Part of me still believed she was dealing with a delusion, and in that case, pushing too hard would only make it worse. So I said goodbye and went home with a knot in my stomach, telling myself I'd come back tomorrow and we'd talk more. Today I woke up in a room that isn't mine. I know that sounds dramatic. I know people wake up in unfamiliar hotel rooms or at a friend's place and feel disoriented for a second. This isn't that. This is my life, but wrong. I look the same. My body feels like mine. My face in the mirror is mine. But everything around me is off. My clothes are different. Not something I would buy. The fabric feels wrong against my skin. Like I'm wearing someone else's choices. My room looks different. Same general layout, but the details are wrong in a way that makes my head hurt. The wallpaper is the wrong color. There are pictures on the wall I don't remember taking. There are small objects on the dresser that aren't mine, but they're placed like they've always been there. I walked out into the hallway, and the house is wrong too. The living room has different couches. The kitchen has different magnets on the fridge. Even the smell of the place is slightly different, like a house that belongs to the same family, but in another version of time. I checked my phone. My email is different. My usernames are different. There are apps I don't remember downloading and messages in my inbox that read like I'm already someone else. I think I know what happened. I think Sarah wasn't lying. I think she wasn't the only one who didn't belong. And now, whatever took her place in my world, or whatever deal she was offered, has reached back and pulled me out of my own life the same way she was pulled out of hers. I'm sitting here trying not to panic, trying to hold on to the few things I know are true. My name feels familiar in my mouth, but even that feels unstable, like it could slip away if I stop concentrating. The worst part is how quickly your brain starts trying to adjust, how fast it starts looking for reasons to accept what's happening, because the alternative is losing your mind. But I don't belong here, and I can't shake the thought that wherever Sarah is now, she's waking up in a room she doesn't recognize, surrounded by a life that isn't hers either. Except she was warned, and I wasn't. I am not where I'm supposed to be. I am not me. Story 2. When I was a kid, I was the kind of child who chased scary things on purpose and then regretted it the second they got too close. I loved anything that felt haunted, cursed, or forbidden. I would watch creepy videos until my stomach tightened, then slam the laptop shut and pretend I wasn't scared. I would read summaries of horror movies I wasn't allowed to see, trying to imagine the scenes without actually watching them. I begged to go into Halloween stores as soon as they started popping up, even though I already knew I'd spend the whole time half hiding behind whoever took me. Everyone in my family knew it. They'd mention it like it was a personality trait I'd been born with. He loves spooky stuff, they'd say, like it was cute. Meanwhile, I was the same kid who couldn't look at a zombie mask for too long without feeling my throat go tight. One year, a family member decided to take me to one of those seasonal Halloween stores that had just opened nearby. I can't remember the name of it now, but I remember a giant pumpkin sitting on top of the building, like a beacon. It's strange what your brain keeps and what it throws away. I don't remember the parking lot or the street it was on, but I remember that pumpkin like it was a landmark. Inside, I don't remember much either, except the parts that spiked my fear. I had a big thing about zombies back then. I don't even know why. Something about the way they move, the way they're half human and half not. There was a zombie sign near one of the aisles, and it freaked me out enough that I still remember its face, its mouth stretched open like it was mid-scream. I tried to act brave because I wanted to keep looking around, but I also kept finding reasons to stay close to my family members' side. We looked at costumes and decorations and those shelves of plastic weapons that always smell like fresh rubber. We walked through aisles of fake cobwebs and animatronic props that would suddenly jerk to life if you stepped on a sensor. I remember the mix of excitement and dread, the way I wanted to see everything and also wanted the store to be over. When we were done, I asked if we could go to Chipotle. I was a picky kid, and Chipotle felt safe. It was bright, normal, predictable. My family member agreed, and we headed toward the exit. That's when I saw it. There was a clown statue near the doors. The odd part is that I'm almost certain the entrance and exit were the exact same set of doors, which means we must have walked past it when we came in. But I don't remember it being there at all. If I had seen it on the way in, I would have remembered, because clowns were another fear of mine. Not the fun circus kind. The wrong kind. The kind with a smile that doesn't match the eyes. I didn't see it move, and I don't remember noticing any animatronic wiring or a sensor pad. It looked like a decoration that was meant to just stand there and be creepy. But my memory of what it looked like is too clear, like my brain took a photograph. Its skin was a mix of white and gray, not like face paint, more like a body that was naturally that color. It was short and wide, almost squat, like it had been compressed. It had massive red shoes that looked too big for its legs, a red nose, and a grin that was stretched far wider than it should have been, like it was carved into its face. Its clothes were a mess of patterns. I remember black and white stripes, but I also remember yellow overalls, like someone had dressed it in mismatched pieces on purpose to make it look wrong. In its hands, it held an axe. The blade was smeared with green goo that looked like slime, dripping down in thick strings. I slowed down without meaning to. My family member kept walking, so I had to speed up again. But as I passed the clown, I felt the hair lift on the back of my neck. Its eyes seemed to follow me. I know how that sounds. I know decorations are designed to look like they're watching you. But this felt different, like the focus was shifting, like it was tracking me specifically. I glanced away and then looked back, and it felt like its grin had widened, even though that's impossible. I remember being creeped out and confused more than anything. Confused because I didn't understand why it bothered me so much. Confused because it felt like I'd walked too close to something I wasn't supposed to notice. We left the store and drove to Chipotle. When we got there, my family member went inside to pick up our food. They told me to stay in the car, and they locked the doors. I didn't mind. I had an iPad, and I was used to waiting in the car while adults did errands. I was sitting there looking down at the screen when something caught my eye in one of the rearview mirrors. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. The clown. It was standing directly behind the car, not across the lot, not near the building, right behind us, close enough that I could see the details of its face in the mirror, close enough that it didn't make any sense. I was a kid, yes, but I wasn't the type of kid who saw monsters in every shadow. I didn't hallucinate. I didn't have an imagination that produced full, detailed figures in the real world. This wasn't me playing pretend. I stared into its eyes through the mirror and felt a pressure build in my chest, like my body knew something before my mind did. Every time I looked away and then looked back, it seemed closer. It was subtle, like it was moving between glances, like it was using the seconds when I wasn't watching. The parking lot was mostly empty. There wasn't anyone standing around, no one who could have been wearing a costume, no one who could have been messing with me. My family member was inside Chipotle and wasn't facing the car. They couldn't see what I was seeing. Panic hit me all at once. I didn't think. I just yanked the car door handle. The alarm started blaring instantly. A couple of people ran out of the restaurant because they heard it and saw a kid standing outside a car with the alarm screaming. They probably thought I was being kidnapped or that something was wrong, and in a way they were right. I felt like something was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I spun around and looked behind me. The clown was gone. No movement. No retreating footsteps. Just gone, like it had never been there. When my family member came running out, confused and annoyed and worried all at once, I tried to explain, but the words came out messy. I pointed. I said, "Clown," and behind the car, and probably sounded like a kid who'd worked himself up into hysterics. We drove home after that, and the whole ride I had that uneasy feeling, like the air itself was watching me. It was just me and my family member in the car. Nothing was happening, and still the weight on my chest wouldn't go away. That night I went to bed. At the time, I shared a room with my older sister. She had the actual bed, and I slept on a mattress on the floor. I had a little tent thing and an elephant projector that threw stars on the ceiling, which was supposed to make bedtime feel fun, but that night, it just made everything feel unreal. I fell asleep eventually, but the sleep wasn't normal. It was heavy and strange, like my brain was stuck in the same loop my fear was stuck in. I had a nightmare. In the dream, the room was warped, like the corners were bending inward. Lightning flashed outside, even though I don't remember there being a storm. The ceiling fan was turning, and hanging from it by its feet was a zombie baby clown thing, twisted and wrong, swaying slightly with the fan's movement. Its skin looked dead. Its mouth was open. The whole scene had that dream logic where you know something is impossible, but it still feels real. In the dream, I was alone. My sister wasn't there. The tent wasn't comforting. The stars were distorted. Then I woke up. I woke up with that sick feeling you get after a nightmare, when your body is still reacting like the danger was real. My hands felt shaky. My stomach rolled like I might throw up. I stared at the ceiling for a second, trying to slow my breathing, trying to convince myself I was safe. Then my eyes drifted to the doorway. The door was open, and the hallway beyond it was dark. At first I saw nothing, just darkness. Then I saw the faintest suggestion of eyes, a hint of a smile. It was like a face was slowly forming out of the dark, details sharpening as my eyes adjusted, like my brain was being forced to recognize it. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. That grin, those eyes, the clown from the store. It wasn't standing in the doorway fully lit. It was half hidden, like it was leaning just enough into the doorway to be seen, letting the darkness do most of the work. But I could see it. I could see the curve of its smile, the pale gray skin, the shape of its head. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt locked. I got up very slowly, like sudden movement would make it rush forward. I didn't break eye contact. I kept staring at it while I crawled across the floor and climbed into my sister's bed. I shook her shoulder until she woke up, whispering her name urgently, trying to keep my voice from cracking. At some point, I looked away for a second, just long enough to make sure she was actually waking up. When I looked back, the doorway was empty. The clown was gone. In the morning, when the room was bright and ordinary again, I got out of bed and looked down at the carpet. We had the kind of carpet that held impressions easily, the kind that shows footprints if you walk across it with heavy steps. There were marks leading to the side of the bed, long footprints, too long. They didn't look like normal shoe prints. They looked stretched, like someone with oversized feet had stood there for a moment, close to where I'd been sleeping. I remember staring at the carpet and feeling cold, because it was the first time I had something physical to anchor the fear, something that made it harder to dismiss as just a dream. For years, that story stayed lodged in my head like a splinter. I told it a few times when I was younger, and people reacted the way people always react to childhood horror stories. Some laughed. Some told me it was my imagination. Some asked if I'd been watching scary movies and gave myself nightmares. As I got older, I started dismissing it too. I told myself I was a kid. I told myself the Halloween store had gotten in my head. I told myself it was an overactive imagination, even if I didn't think I had one. I told myself that if it had been real, it wouldn't have stopped after one night. Eventually, I filed it away as a weird childhood memory and moved on. That was the only way to live with it. Until last week. Last week, I went out with friends to see a movie. Afterwards, since there was a smoothie place across the street, we walked over there. It wasn't a big plan. More like, we're already here, let's grab something quick. People were talking over each other, laughing, half-focused on their phones, half-focused on whatever story someone was telling. I had a couple of work calls I needed to take, and my friends all had things to do the next morning, so they drifted out one by one. Eventually, I realized I was the only customer left in the smoothie shop besides the employees behind the counter. When I finally walked outside, the parking lot was almost empty. It was late, really late, close to 1 a.m. The air had that hollow nighttime quality, where sounds feel far away and even small movements feel too noticeable. As I headed toward my car, I got that same sensation I remembered from being a kid. The feeling of being watched. It wasn't a thought at first. It was physical. A tightening in my chest, a prickling along my shoulders. Like some part of me recognized the shape of danger before my mind could name it. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself that being alone in a near-empty lot at 1 a.m. makes anyone feel uneasy. Then, as I approached my car from the front, I saw something move in the back seat. Not a reflection, not a shadow passing, a shuffle, low and deliberate, like something adjusting its position. My whole body went rigid. I changed my angle, trying to get a better view through the passenger side windows without walking right up to the driver's door. I told myself it could be a person, a real person. Someone breaking into cars, someone hiding, someone who might run if they realized I saw them. I stepped sideways, peering in. And that's when I saw it. The clown. It was in my back seat, turned toward me, smiling like it had been waiting. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It was like my mind tried to protect itself by insisting it couldn't be true. Then the memory of the Halloween store slammed into place, and I felt my stomach drop hard. I didn't unlock the car. I didn't yell. I didn't do anything heroic. I ran. I sprinted back into the smoothie shop so fast I nearly slipped. I burst through the door and shouted at the employee to call 911. My phone was in my hand, but I was shaking so badly I wasn't thinking straight. The employee looked startled, then alarmed, then grabbed their phone. When the police arrived, I told them someone was in my back seat. That was the only way I could say it without sounding insane. I couldn't bring myself to say clown. I couldn't bring myself to say the same thing from my childhood. They went out with flashlights and opened my car. They searched it thoroughly. They checked under seats, in the trunk, everything. They found nothing. No person, no mask, no costume, no sign of forced entry that they mentioned to me. Then one of them said they did find something. A couple of hairs, green hairs. They bagged them like evidence, but the way they spoke to me changed after that. Like they'd decided it was a prank, or a weird Halloween thing, or someone messing with me. They told me I was safe. They told me it was probably a stupid joke because Halloween was coming up. But I knew it wasn't that. Not with the way it looked at me. Not with the way the memory fit perfectly into the fear I'd buried for years. A prank doesn't feel like recognition. A prank doesn't feel like something that remembers you. After that night, things didn't calm down. They got worse. Earlier today, I came downstairs and found my front door wide open. I know I locked it. I always lock it. I'm the kind of person who checks twice. Seeing it open made my skin go cold because it wasn't just a weird sighting in a parking lot anymore. It was my home, my space, the place where I'm supposed to be safe. And my carpet, this is the part I can't stop thinking about. My carpet is the same kind we had when I was a kid, the kind that holds impressions easily. Yesterday morning, when I woke up, I saw giant footprints leading to the side of my bed. Then the prints turned around and led back out through my bedroom door. I stood there staring at them, unable to move for a long time, because it felt like proof that something had come in while I was asleep and stood right next to me, just watching. Now I don't feel safe. I feel like I'm waiting for something that has been patient for a long time. I feel like one day it's going to stop hovering at the edge of my life and actually step into it. I keep trying to name what it is, because names make things manageable. If it's a person, the police can handle it. If it's a prank, it will get bored. If it's a dream, it will fade. If it's stress, I can treat it. But it doesn't fit neatly into any of those. I keep thinking about that old story people used to tell at sleepovers. The one about the babysitter who asks the family if she can cover up the clown statue because it's freaking her out. And the family tells her they don't own a clown statue. The twist is always that it wasn't a statue at all. It was a person standing there pretending. For years I heard that story and felt creeped out in a fun way. Now it feels like a warning I didn't understand at the time. I have this awful sense that I'm going to be the babysitter in that story. And in some versions, the babysitter makes it out. In others, she doesn't. A couple of days after the car incident, I had another encounter. A friend asked me to go with her to pick up something she'd bought off Poshmark. The seller lived nearby, and my friend didn't want to go alone. I agreed because I didn't want to be alone either. Not after what happened, even though I didn't say that part out loud. When we got there, my friend went inside to do the pickup. I stayed in the car, waiting, trying to act normal. And then I saw it again in the rearview mirror, just staring at me. This time it was different. It wasn't smiling. Its mouth turned down in a heavy frown, as if it was angry, or disappointed, or tired of playing. Its face looked like it was dripping, like wax melting under heat, features sliding slightly out of place. The skin looked wet. I didn't get out of the car this time. I didn't set off the alarm. I didn't run. I just sat there, locked in place, keeping eye contact with it the way you keep eye contact with something you think might attack if you look away. My whole body ached with the effort of staying still. When my friend finally came back out, I asked her if she saw anything. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind and said she had no idea what I was talking about. That was almost worse than seeing it because it made me feel isolated inside my own fear. Like whatever this is, it belongs only to me. Now, as I'm writing this, I can't shake the sensation that I'm being watched again. I keep hearing footsteps in the hallway, pacing back and forth, slow and patient. I hear breathing, too, but I'm so tense I can't tell if it's mine or not. Every little sound in my house feels amplified, like the quiet is turning everything into a threat. I told my friends. I tried to explain without sounding completely unhinged. Most of them laughed it off at first. Then they got uncomfortable. Then some of them stopped responding. A few have blocked me outright. I don't even blame them because if someone told me this story, I probably think they were having some kind of breakdown too. But I know what I saw. I know what I saw when I was a kid. And I know what I saw in my back seat at 1 a.m. And I know what I saw in the mirror while I waited for my friend to come back out of that house. And now my front door is open when it shouldn't be. And my carpet holds footprints that shouldn't exist. I don't know how much longer I can handle this. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's getting closer each time because it's feeding on fear, or because it's getting impatient, or because it's finally decided I'm old enough to understand what it is. I want this to be a prank. I want to wake up and find out someone has been messing with me for a week, and it's all going to end with an apology and a laugh, and Me feeling stupid. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like something that started in a Halloween store when I was a kid, has been following me for years, quietly, waiting for the moment when I'd stop dismissing it as imagination. I don't need advice. I can already hear what people would say. Change the locks. Buy cameras. See a doctor. Stop watching scary stuff. Sleep with the lights on. Call the police again. None of that changes the fact that it keeps appearing where it shouldn't be able to appear, and it keeps leaving marks where no prank should be able to leave them without someone getting caught. By the time anyone replies to this, I might already be gone. But if I'm still here tomorrow, I'll update. Story 3. I don't really post here, but something happened at a gig last month, and I can't explain it. I keep trying to tell myself it was nerves or being overtired, or my brain filling in blanks the way it does when you're stressed. But the longer I sit with it, the harder it is to ignore. I'm a drag performer. Nothing huge, mostly local clubs, the kind of places where the stage is sticky and the mic cuts out if you breathe wrong. You learn fast how to keep smiling while everything around you falls apart. You learn how to fix a lash in the dark. You learn which songs can save a dead crowd and which ones will get you stared at like you're wasting everyone's time. A few weeks ago, I got booked at a place called the Velvet Haze. It's been around forever. People say it's been open since the 70s, and the building looks like it's been collecting smoke and secrets ever since. Everybody in the scene knows the name, but not in a proud way. More like it's a rite of passage. The kind of club you do once so you can say you did it. People say if you can handle that crowd, you can handle anything. It wasn't the crowd that got to me, though. It was the place itself. The backstage area isn't really a dressing room. It's a basement storage space someone turned into one by bolting mirrors to the wall. There are cheap string lights around the mirrors, and they flicker if you touch them, like the wiring hates being disturbed. The ceiling is low. The air down there feels stale, like it never fully dries. Everything looks old in the way old things look when nobody takes care of them. The mirrors are cracked. The counters are stained with makeup that's probably older than me. There are wigs on foam heads, but they don't look like anyone's current collection. They look abandoned, like props left behind after a show that never got cleaned up. I was getting ready, trying to focus on my routine and not on my stomach flipping over itself, when I realized I wasn't alone. There was another queen sitting on the counter, smoking like she owned the space. That alone was weird. You're absolutely not supposed to smoke inside, especially not in a basement with 1,000 flammable things and questionable ventilation. But there she was, cigarette between her fingers, ash dropping casually onto the floor. And what made it stranger was that nobody else seemed to react like it was a problem. No one shouted at her. No one told her to stop. It was like she'd always been there and the rules didn't apply. Her look was very old school. Big auburn hair shaped into a dramatic wave. Sharp eyeliner, the kind that makes your eyes look like they were drawn on with a ruler. A rhinestone dress that caught the light every time she shifted, even down in that dim basement. It wasn't a modern retro look either. It felt like the real thing, like she'd stepped out of a different era and never bothered to update. She watched me for a second, then smiled like she already knew me. "You knew?" she asked. I said yeah, first time there. She laughed softly, like she'd heard that 1,000 times. Then she said, "You've got the twitch. First time at the haze always shows." I remember touching my hands without thinking, like I'd been caught doing something obvious. I hadn't noticed I was shaking, but once she said it, I realized I'd been tapping my fingers against my makeup bag nonstop. I don't know why, but she felt easy to talk to. Not like a stranger at all. More like an older queen you meet once and immediately treat like an auntie, the kind who can read you in 5 seconds, but doesn't do it to be cruel. She made the basement feel less claustrophobic just by being there. We started chatting while I glued down brows and tried to get my eyeliner even. Normal stuff. How long I'd been performing, what number I was doing, whether the crowd there was really as brutal as people said. At one point, I admitted I was nervous. I tried to make it sound casual, like I didn't care that my heart was racing. She leaned in a little, and her perfume hit me for the first time. It was strong and powdery. The kind of scent that feels like it belongs to another decade. It reminded me of old dressing tables and vintage purses, of women who carried compacts and applied lipstick without a mirror because they'd done it so many times. She said, very quietly, "The trick is pretending you've already died. Nothing scares you after that." I laughed, because what else do you do when someone says something like that? It sounded like a line, like something an older performer would say to be dramatic and mysterious. I even remember saying something like, "Okay, diva," still smiling, still pretending I wasn't unsettled. But the thing is, it stuck with me. The way she said it wasn't joking. It wasn't a punchline. It sounded like advice she'd learned the hard way. Before I could ask what she meant, someone called my name from upstairs. My slot. I stood up, took one last look at myself in the cracked mirror, adjusted my wig, and headed for the stairs. My set is honestly kind of a blur. The Velvet Haze crowd was loud, and for once, it felt like loud in a good way. I remember the heat from the lights. I remembered the bass shaking the floor under my heels. I remember one moment where I locked eyes with someone in the front row, and they were smiling so hard it gave me confidence. I think I did well. I know I didn't bomb, but I can't tell you exactly what happened song to song. It's like the whole thing got smeared in my memory, like a wet fingerprint across glass. When I got back downstairs, the queen on the counter was gone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People move. People go out back. People leave early if they've already done their number or if they don't want to hang around. I started packing up my stuff, wiping glitter off my hands, taking off jewelry I was afraid I'd lose. But something bothered me enough that I asked one of the other performers casually, "Hey, did you see that queen down here earlier? The one smoking?" The performer looked at me like I'd asked about a person who wasn't real. "What queen?" she said. I described her. Auburn hair, rhinestone dress, cigarette, old school vibe. She frowned harder the more I talked. Then she said, "It was only the 4 of us booked tonight." I remember standing there with my wig halfway off, feeling stupid. Like I'd misunderstood something obvious. Like maybe the smoker had been staff, or someone's friend, or some random person who wandered downstairs. So I asked another performer. Same reaction. Confusion. A blank look like they had no idea what I was talking about. That was the first moment the night shifted from weird to wrong. Not scary exactly, just off. like a note in a song that doesn't match the rest, but you can't stop hearing it once you notice. After the show, I should have left. Most of us leave fast because the adrenaline drops, and you just want to go home and wash off the makeup and let your feet stop hurting. But I didn't leave. I told myself I'd forgotten something. A hairpin, maybe, a lipstick, anything. But I knew I hadn't. I just couldn't make myself walk out like everything was normal. There's a hallway in the back of the club with old photos on the wall. Black and white shots, faded color prints, performers from years ago. Each one has a name and a date underneath, written in that kind of handwriting that looks like it came from a marker that dried out halfway through. I wandered over there without really meaning to. I started looking at the pictures the way you do when you're killing time, smiling at hairstyles that look insane now, at makeup trends that have come back around. Then I saw her, same face, same hair, same dress, the same confident expression, like the camera was lucky to catch her. The name under the photo said Marla Rose. Under that, in smaller writing, it said she died in 1975. I stood there staring until my eyes watered. I pulled my phone out to check the year because I convinced myself I'd read it wrong. I zoomed in on the photo. 1975. Clear as day. I don't remember leaving after that. I don't remember walking through the club or pushing the door open. I just remember being outside in the alley behind the building, breathing cold air like I'd been underwater. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I kept looking back at the door as if I expected her to step out behind me and laugh and tell me I'd fallen for it. And that's when I realized the alley was the exact place I'd been standing earlier when I talked to her while she smoked. Same wall, same dumpsters, same stale smell of old beer and cigarette ash. I didn't go back for a while after that. I avoided the club name when it came up. When someone mentioned the Velvet Haze, I nodded like it was no big deal and changed the subject. But a few days later, the question wouldn't let me go, so I asked the owner about her. I tried to keep it casual, like I was just curious about the club's history, like I hadn't spoken to the woman in the photo. The moment I said, Marla Rose, his face changed. Not shock, exactly. More like something heavy settling onto him. He got quiet in a way that made me wish I hadn't brought it up. He told me she used to perform there a lot. He said she was one of the best they'd ever had. He didn't smile when he said it. He sounded careful, like he was choosing words that wouldn't wake something up. Then he said she died after a show, in the alley behind the club. He didn't give me details. He just said someone was waiting for her and they never found out who it was. No arrest, no closure, just a story that turned into a warning people tell each other when they're young and don't believe warnings apply to them. I went cold all over again. I haven't been back to the Velvet Haze since. But this is the part that's been eating at me. I keep getting booked there again. Same night of the week. Same time slot. Like a repeating appointment. The messages come through like it's already decided. And the thing is, I didn't give them my availability again. I didn't follow up. I didn't ask to return. I haven't even responded most of the time. Yet the invitations keep showing up like I'm on a schedule I never agreed to, and a couple times now when I've been getting ready at completely different venues. I've smelled that perfume, that strong, powdery scent. appearing out of nowhere in rooms that smell like hairspray and sweat and cheap vodka. The first time I thought it was someone else's fragrance drifting past me. The second time I started paying attention. It didn't move like normal smells. It didn't fade in slowly. It was just there. Suddenly, like someone had opened a bottle right beside my face. Last night it happened again. I told myself I was imagining it. I tried to focus on my makeup. I tried to ignore the way my stomach turned. After the show, when I got home, I went through my bag looking for my lashes because I couldn't find them. That's when I found a cigarette. It wasn't crushed. It wasn't loose tobacco. It was a clean, intact cigarette tucked into the side pocket, like I'd put it there on purpose. There was lipstick on the filter. Not my shade, not even close. I don't smoke. I never have. I hate the smell. And I know for a fact it wasn't in my bag when I left my apartment. I sat on my bed holding it between two fingers, like it might bite me, and all I could hear in my head was her voice. The trick is pretending you've already died. Nothing scares you after that. I don't know if I'm overthinking this. I don't know if this is my brain trying to make patterns out of nothing. But I can't shake the feeling that Marla Rose wasn't just a story on the wall, that she wasn't just a memory the club keeps like decoration. I just got another message asking me to perform at the Velvet Haze next weekend. I haven't replied yet, so I'm asking you, do I go back? Story 4. I found the tape deep in the woods, and even before I played it, I had the feeling I shouldn't be touching it at all. I was out hiking for a few days, the kind of trip where you're mostly trying to clear your head and let your legs do the thinking. The trail was quiet and narrow in places, and there were sections where the branches leaned in so close you had to duck and push through. At one point, we came to a small detour off the main path. It wasn't a real trail so much as a break in the brush, like someone had been walking there often enough to press the plants down. Right off that detour, there was a thick, messy thicket of branches and dead leaves piled up like it had been swept into a mound. We needed a flat spot to set up camp, and the mound was in the way, so we started clearing it out. We pulled branches aside, kicked away damp leaves, and dug down to get to the ground underneath. That was when I saw it. A VHS tape sitting under the pile, like it had been placed there on purpose. Not lying on top, not half visible, buried deep enough that you wouldn't find it unless you were already moving things around. The plastic shell was scuffed and slightly cracked like it had been under pressure, but it wasn't destroyed. It looked like someone had tried to hide it and expected it to stay hidden. I stood there holding it for a second, trying to decide whether it was trash or something important. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have because of what it represented. VHS tapes don't just show up in the woods by accident anymore. Not like that. Not buried. I didn't throw it away. I don't know why. Curiosity? Probably. That same stupid curiosity that convinces you you're just being observant, when really you're stepping closer to something you should leave alone. I put it in my bag and kept hiking. For the next couple of days, the tape stayed in there, wrapped between my spare clothes and gear. Every now and then I'd remember it and feel a little jolt, like I'd forgotten I was carrying something fragile. I didn't mention it much. It was easier to treat it like a weird find and nothing more. When I got home, The first thing I did after unpacking wasn't laundry or a shower. It was taking the tape out and looking at it under real light. It was definitely a VHS tape. The shell was damaged in one corner and the clear window was scratched up, but the tape inside looked intact. There was a paper label on the front with handwriting that had faded slightly, but it was still readable. For Mom. That was it. No date, no name. Just that. Something about those two words made it feel more personal than it should have. Like it wasn't supposed to be lost. Like it wasn't just old media someone dumped. It felt like a message that had failed to reach the person it was meant for. I told myself there was a normal explanation. Someone's old junk. A prank. A forgotten time capsule. But the more I stared at the label, the more I wanted to know what was on it. The problem was I didn't own a VCR. I don't think I've owned one in over a decade. I didn't even know if they still made them. So I did what anyone does now when they want something specific and slightly outdated. I went online. I bought the cheapest VHS player I could find. I had to dig through listings, compare grainy photos, and read descriptions full of untested and as is, but eventually I found one for $5. $5. That alone should have been a sign. The seller was a young guy running a garage sale outside a modest house. He had a folding table full of random items, old lamps, mismatched dishes, boxes of cables nobody understands anymore. When I asked about the VCR, he shrugged like it was worthless. "It was my dad's," he said. "I'm just getting rid of stuff. Don't need any of it." He didn't seem weird about it. He didn't warn me. He didn't ask why I wanted it. He just took my $5 and went back to organizing boxes, like he'd already forgotten the exchange. I drove home with the VCR on the passenger seat and the VHS tape in my bag, and the whole time I felt like I was doing something slightly wrong. Not illegal. Just wrong in the way you feel when you're about to look through a drawer that isn't yours. At home, I hooked the VCR up to my TV with an adapter I had to dig out of a storage bin. The setup took longer than I expected because the connections felt like they belonged to another century. When I finally got it working, the TV screen flickered into that familiar blue-black static you only see in old footage. I held the tape for a second, staring at the label again, for Mom. Then I slid it into the slot. The VCR swallowed it with a dull mechanical clunk. The tape whirred, the screen jumped. And then the image appeared, compressed into an old 4:3 format, leaving blank space on both sides of my widescreen TV. The footage started in the woods. A man was filming himself walking along a trail. The camera held at chest height. The recording had that handheld jitter that makes you slightly dizzy. The kind of footage people took before stabilization was a standard feature. The cameraman wasn't narrating at first. He just wandered, panning left and right, lingering on trees and patches of sunlight on the ground. It went on like that for a couple minutes. It was boring enough that I started to wonder if the whole tape was just someone's home video. Then the cameraman walked toward a thick wall of bushes and slowed down. The camera shifted, trying to point at something through the leaves, but at first it was completely out of focus. The image was a blur of green and brown. The cameraman adjusted the settings, zoomed in, fiddled with contrast, then corrected the focus. A house came into view in the distance. It sat on top of a low hillside, connected to the forest by a dirt driveway that sloped downward like a vein cut into the earth. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a ruin. It looked like a real house, solid and lived in at some point, but the angle and the distance made it hard to read details. Still, something about it made the space around it feel wrong, like the trees were leaning away. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of wind and the faint hiss of tape audio. Then the cameraman finally spoke. "The compound," he said. His voice was low, like he didn't want to be heard. "A lot of people around here talk about this place. Here we are." The camera zoomed out slightly, but kept the house centered. Then it panned slowly side to side, checking the surroundings like the cameraman was trying to map the area. To the left of the property was dense forest, thick enough that the dirt road disappeared into it. To the right was a fenced area enclosing an open field. That field was full of random objects piled together in one cluttered mound: furniture, appliances, tools, things that didn't belong outside. The pile looked like the leftovers of a dozen homes dumped into one spot. Beyond the fence was more forest, nothing else that stood out. The cameraman started explaining what he thought the property was, and his tone shifted into something like a documentary voice, as if he'd rehearsed it. He said the house had once belonged to a family that lived there for 50 years. Then it was sold. The new owners, according to him, were a small family from Canada who had moved down to New England. He described them like a local mystery, the kind of people who don't wave back, the kind of people neighbors talk about without ever actually talking to them. He mentioned one homeowner who had seen the family walking near the trails. According to this person, the father was talking about something intensely, like he was explaining a plan or preaching. The mother stared at him with a blank expression, almost like she'd checked out of the conversation entirely. Almost like he'd said something he wasn't supposed to say out loud. The kids, the witness claimed, seemed normal enough, wandering along and looking at trees, oblivious to whatever tension existed between the parents. Then he told a second story, one that sounded like a campfire rumor, but was delivered with weird seriousness. Another homeowner, a hunter near a lake, was out early one cold morning. He saw the family through the reticle of his rifle scope, strolling through the woods. At first he didn't pay attention, because why would he? But minutes later he looked again, and the sight made him uneasy enough that he aimed more carefully, trying to understand what he was seeing. The cameraman didn't describe the exact harrowing sight in detail. He danced around it almost like he didn't want to say the specific thing out loud. He just kept repeating that the family looked toward the hunter's general direction, and that the hunter felt compelled to aim properly and see what they would do. Even through the low quality, I could feel the cameraman's excitement. Not happy excitement, the kind you get when you believe you're close to proving something. He moved on to a third account. A hiker had been camping in the woods nearby. Around evening, while he was setting up, he heard a noise and looked around for the source. He didn't see anything except forest. He finished setting up his tent and went to sleep. Then, in the middle of the night, he saw a silhouette standing directly outside the tent. A person shape, close enough that the fabric of the tent outlined it faintly. The hiker froze. Before he could unzip the tent, the figure vanished. But not before he heard movement, footsteps or rustling, moving away into the darkness. On its own, that story could have been anyone. A curious stranger, a lost person, a prank. But the cameraman insisted it had been the family. He argued that they approached anyone near their property, not to scare them, but to assess them, like they were checking for threats, like they wanted control of the space around them. He said they wanted something from anyone in the area, and that if there was any issue, they would deal with it. Listening to him, it sounded like he was trying to build a case, like he had decided what was happening and was collecting details to support it. Then he began moving. The camera shifted as he descended the slope toward the property. The footage got shakier. His breathing grew louder. He moved quickly and then suddenly dropped low, slipping into a patch of bushes near the driveway. The lens caught leaves and branches close up. The cameraman adjusted himself, trying to find a sight line. Once he seemed settled, he whispered again. "I've thought about it for a while," he said. "When I heard the gossip, I figured it was just a family of doomsday preppers. You know, people who want to vanish when the world ends. But looking at it now, no. It's more than that. Whatever they're hiding, I need to know." He waited for a moment, listening. The audio picked up nothing but wind and the faint mechanical whir of the camera. Then he moved closer. The camera crept toward the side of the house, staying low, panning carefully. Eventually, he ended up next to a closed window. He raised the camera and pointed it at the interior. The view inside was dim, but clear enough to make out shapes. A kitchen, sorta. Cabinets, a counter, a table, but no fridge, no stove, no normal signs of life. It looked like a set after filming had wrapped and the crew had cleared out. Empty in a way that felt deliberate. And then, in the far end of the house, in the darker area where the light didn't reach properly, I saw something that made my stomach knot. A figure. Not fully lit, not clear enough to identify, but a shadowy person shape standing still, deep inside the house. The cameraman didn't react, which meant he didn't see it. The camera was pointed in, but his eyes must have been on the window frame or the lock, or he was glancing away. Whatever the reason, he kept moving like there was nothing there. The camera dipped down toward the ground for a moment, catching the cameraman's legs, his shoes shifting in leaves. "Okay," he whispered. "This is the house. I'm going to check what's in there first before I go in." He stood and peeked through the glass. He sounded confused. Where the hell is the furniture?" He leaned closer, adjusting for a better view. "Strange," he muttered. "There's nothing inside this place." Then he tried the window. It opened. The next part made my skin crawl because it was so casual. Like he'd done this kind of thing before. He climbed through the window and dropped into the house. The camera pointed mostly at where he stepped, showing floorboards and the edge of the counter. Then he lifted it and began moving through rooms. The house was empty. Not messy empty. Not abandoned empty. Clean empty. The floors were clear. The walls were bare. There were occasional fixtures. Fans, maybe a space heater, bits of furniture that looked more like props than belongings, but no sign of actual living. No photos, no clothes, no dishes, no food. Nothing that indicated a family lived there. He swore under his breath as he moved room to room. How the fuck does this make any sense?" he said. "This place is empty." "All this time?" He sounded angry, like he felt cheated. Like he'd come all this way for nothing. That anger is probably what made him keep going. He found a door and opened it, revealing stairs down to the basement. The camera pointed down into a brightly lit space below. The light in the basement was on. The cameraman stopped, and for the first time he sounded uncertain in a way that felt honest. "Why is this one on?" he whispered. Then, as if he couldn't stand the suspense, "Should I check downstairs?" "Fuck it." He started down the stairs. His steps were slow and heavy, and they echoed, and the camera stayed fixed on the stairwell as he descended. For an agonizing minute, it was just the view of steps and the sound of him breathing. I remember leaning forward on my couch without realizing I'd moved. When he reached the bottom, the camera panned around. The basement was empty too. No boxes, no storage, no washer and dryer, no clutter, just bare space. Then the camera caught something on the far wall. A sticky note, bright yellow against plain surface. He walked toward it, the camera zooming slightly, as if he needed to confirm it was real. His hand reached out, pinched the note, and peeled it off. The lens focused on the words. "Found you." That was all it said. 2 words in blunt handwriting, like someone had written them quickly, sure of themselves. Even though I was sitting safe at home watching a screen, dread hit me immediately. The meaning was too clear. It wasn't "found it." It wasn't a label. It was a message aimed at a person. I heard the cameraman gasp. The note dropped from his fingers. For a second, the camera shook like his hands were trembling. He didn't narrate anymore. He didn't try to sound brave. He turned and ran. The camera whipped around wildly as he sprinted back up the stairs, back through the empty house, heading for the window he came in through. He climbed out and hit the ground running, the footage blurring into streaks of trees and dirt. And then, behind his frantic breathing, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not his. Not just echoes. Actual footsteps, fast and close like people were right behind him. "Fuck!" he shouted, voice cracking. "They're chasing me." At that point, the video was almost impossible to make out. The camera was shaking so hard the image became a smear of motion. But every few seconds, there were flashes of light, like flashlights cutting through the trees. It went on for a couple minutes, then suddenly the camera dropped. The lens hit grass at an angle. The audio thudded and distorted. The cameraman's running continued off-screen, getting farther away. The final shot was from the ground, tilted slightly up, catching a dark strip of forest and the frantic sweep of flashlight beams. The night vision kicked on automatically, turning everything a sickly green. That's when I saw the worst part. Behind the people with flashlights, something moved that didn't move like a person. It looked like a shadow gliding through the trees in the same direction the cameraman ran. Not running, not walking, not stepping. Gliding, like darkness with intention. Then one of the pursuers stopped. She turned toward the camera on the ground as if she knew exactly where it was, as if she could feel it watching her. The flashlight beam didn't hit her face directly, but night vision made her visible anyway. She wore elaborate black robes with metallic accents that caught light along the neckline and collar. It looked ceremonial, not practical. The outfit didn't belong in the woods, and that made it worse because it meant whoever she was, she'd dressed for a purpose. Her face was covered by a pale white mask. Not a cheap Halloween mask. It sat too cleanly, too perfectly, featureless in a way that made it hard to focus on. The eye holes looked dark and deep, like there wasn't anything human behind them. She stared down at the camera, and then the tape ended. I sat there for a long time after, not even realizing I'd stopped breathing properly. When I finally exhaled, my chest hurt. My living room felt too quiet, like the sound from the tape had left something behind. Immediately, my brain started trying to organize it into questions, because questions feel safer than conclusions. Who were those people? Why was the house empty? Why was the basement light on? Who wrote the sticky note? And why did it feel like it was meant for the cameraman specifically? What was that gliding shadow behind them? And how did the tape end up buried under branches near a detour off my trail, hidden like someone wanted it found, but only by the right person? I kept rewinding certain parts, especially the moment at the window. The moment I'd seen a figure inside the house before the cameraman even entered. The moment at the end when the woman turned and looked right at the camera. Every time I rewatched it, it felt less like random footage and more like a warning that was recorded and then planted. Then the thought that made my stomach twist even harder came back. This wasn't the only tape I found on that hike. I didn't mention it at first because I didn't want to sound insane, and because I was hoping the first tape would be boring enough that I'd laugh at myself for even caring. But it wasn't. And now the fact that there were others feels like the real problem. I found several tapes scattered across the woods, tucked into strange spots during the trip. Not all buried the same way, but all placed where you wouldn't see them unless you were already looking down at the right moment, or stepping off the trail or moving through brush. At the time, I told myself it was just litter, someone dumping old media, kids playing a game. Now it feels coordinated, like someone left a trail. Like I wasn't just hiking, like I was being led from one place to another without realizing it. Part of me wants to throw all the tapes away, smash them, pretend I never touched any of them. Another part of me keeps hearing the cameraman's voice saying, "the compound," and keeps thinking about that sticky note in the basement. Found you. I keep thinking about how personal that sounds and how it doesn't really matter whether it was meant for him or for whoever eventually watched the tape. I don't know if I'm going to watch the others. I keep telling myself I won't. Then I catch myself looking at the stack in my bag like they're pulling at me. It's hard to explain, but finding them feels less like discovering something and more like stepping into something that was already happening. And I don't think I was supposed to be a part of it. Story 5, I've been trying to write this for almost 3 years. Every time I start, I stop. Once I got 2 pages in and deleted everything. Another time I printed it out and threw it away. I don't know what's different today, except that I'm tired of carrying it around. I'm tired of replaying it in my head like it's something I can edit after the fact. My therapist keeps telling me that writing can take weight off a memory. I don't know if she meant this kind of writing, the kind that makes your hands go cold while you type, but I need it out of me. I need it somewhere else, even if it's just a screen. This is about the 18 months I lived next door to a man named Paul Garrett. What I realized about him too late, and what happened to the woman who lived on the other side of him. I moved into a building called Callaway Arms, when I was 28. The name sounded classy in a way that almost felt like a joke. It was just a 3-story walk-up in a neighborhood that didn't quite know what it wanted to be yet. A half-and-half place where old businesses clung on next to new ones that looked like they'd been designed by the same person. A laundromat sitting beside a cold brew bar. A shop selling religious candles down the street from a boutique with nothing in the window except a plant and a small sign that said, curated. My apartment was small but fine. 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, thin walls, slightly slanted floors. My front window looked straight into the building across the street, close enough that I could see the blue flicker of someone's TV most nights if their curtains were open. It wasn't the dream apartment, but it was affordable, and it felt like a fresh start. I moved in on a Saturday. By Sunday evening, I'd met Paul. He knocked around 7. When I opened the door, he was standing there holding a foil-covered plate, smiling like we already knew each other. He was mid-50s, lean, gray at the temples. He had the kind of tan you only get from actually being outside, not from vacations or self-tanner. His button-down shirt was tucked into khakis, slightly too formal for a Sunday night in an old apartment building. "I heard you moving in," he said, still smiling. "I'm Paul, 2B. Just wanted to welcome you." Then he held out the plate like it was a peace offering. I made too much lasagna. It was such a normal neighbor thing that it instantly lowered my guard. I thanked him, told him that was really kind, and he nodded like he'd done it 100 times. When I ate it later, standing at my kitchen counter because I hadn't unpacked the table yet, I remember thinking I'd gotten lucky. It was good, really good. Not frozen or bland. Homemade, cheesy, the kind of meal that feels like someone actually put time into it. The building only had 6 units, so neighbor wasn't an abstract concept. You couldn't avoid people. You learned who lived where, whose footsteps sounded heavier, who played music late, who always slammed the stairwell door. Downstairs were the Pattersons, an older couple who kept to themselves. They had a rooster doormat and a habit of turning their TV volume up too high. Across from them was Marcus, who worked nights. I barely ever saw him, and when I did, he spoke like every word cost him effort. Upstairs was Diane and her 2 kids. She was always on the phone. There was an ex who came and went, sometimes loud, sometimes apologetic, always lingering too long in the entryway. Across from me was Suyan Park. I didn't meet Suyan right away. We passed each other once or twice, polite nods, the kind you do before you have names attached. I officially met her a couple weeks later in the stairwell when we were both carrying groceries and both pretending we weren't struggling. She was around my age. Quiet but not shy. Quiet in a way that felt intentional, like she was listening more than she was speaking. There was humor under her calmness, too, like she could make a joke with just a look. She worked in product design. She was new to the city. She said it like it was a project she was still learning, like she hadn't decided if she liked it yet. We started with small conversations, then coffee once, then wine on a weekend when we both admitted we'd been avoiding unpacking. The kind of friendship you build in your late 20s when everything still feels a little unstable, and you're trying to create a life from scratch, not just fall into one. I liked her immediately. I trusted her quickly, which isn't something I do often. Paul liked her too. At first, it looked harmless. He'd show up in the hallway when she was coming or going. He'd knock on her door with food because apparently lasagna wasn't a one-time thing for him. He'd shovel the steps before anyone else even woke up when it snowed. He'd bring packages inside if someone wasn't home. Helpful, polite, always present. Individually, none of it meant anything. That's important. That's the reason I didn't react sooner. And it's the reason people like Paul get away with what they do. Everything he did, you could explain away if you looked at it alone. I told myself he was just being a good neighbor. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he liked feeling useful. We've all known people like that, the ones who need to be needed. But I started noticing things anyway. Little things that didn't fit the harmless story as neatly as I wanted them to. The timing, for one. Our front doors made a very specific sound when they opened, a stuck then released noise like the latch always caught for half a second. After a while, I started realizing Paul's door would open shortly after that sound whenever Suyan came home. Not always, but often enough that I started paying attention. She'd come up the stairs, her key would scrape in her lock, that familiar click, and then Paul's door would open and he'd step out like he'd just happened to be passing through. The questions were another thing. He'd talk to me sometimes, normal enough small talk, but he always found a way to ask about her, how she was doing, if she was liking the neighborhood, if we'd hung out recently, if she was seeing anyone. At first I answered casually because I didn't think anything of it. Then I started answering less. Then I realized he asked every single time we spoke, like it was the main reason he'd started the conversation in the first place. And then there was Suyan's reaction. She was generous with people by default. She tried to assume good intentions. She didn't jump to accusing anyone of being creepy just because they were awkward. But whenever Paul came up, she would pause like she needed an extra second to choose her words. "He's very attentive," she said once. It didn't sound like a compliment when she said it. It sounded like a careful warning dressed up as a neutral statement. One night over wine at my place, she mentioned he'd knocked on her door at 11 to return a dish. That in itself wasn't horrible. People returned dishes. But she said he'd stayed. He'd leaned in the doorway, talking, asking questions, smiling like they were close, and she didn't know how to end it without being rude. "I think he just doesn't have great social awareness," she added, like she was trying to convince herself. I remember saying, "That's a little weird," and she nodded, but then shrugged it off. "Probably nothing." I agreed. "Yeah, probably." I think about that moment a lot because that's when I could have pushed. I could have said, "No, that isn't nothing. That's not normal. You don't owe politeness to someone who makes you uncomfortable in your own home." I could have made it real, could have named it, but I didn't. I let it go. By October, the feeling had changed. It wasn't just awkward anymore. It felt off in a sharper way, in a way that made my skin prickle. Paul knew things he shouldn't have known. Small things, but too specific. He mentioned Suyan had been sick. I hadn't told him. I hadn't even known, not really. He said she looked tired, but he said it with certainty, like he'd been watching closely enough to track changes most people wouldn't notice. He knew she had a friend visiting for the weekend, even though I hadn't seen the friend and I hadn't mentioned it. He said it casually in conversation, like it was normal information for him to have, like the building itself had told him. That night, I texted Su-Yan something I'd been afraid to say out loud. "Does it ever feel like Paul knows too much about your schedule?" She didn't respond right away. When she did, it was only one word at first. Yes. A few minutes later, another message came through. "I've been trying to figure out if I'm just being weird about it." I told her she wasn't being weird. I told her it wasn't in her head. I told her my own stomach had been turning about it too. She replied with something that stuck with me, because it was the trap we were both caught in. "I don't know what to do with it, though. He hasn't done anything." He hadn't done anything. Not in a way you could write down cleanly. Not in a way that would make someone else immediately understand. There was no single dramatic incident you could point to. Just a pattern, a slow pressure, a feeling of being watched that builds until you start changing your life around it. After that, I started paying closer attention. I tried to be fair. I really did. I know that once you start looking for patterns, you can find them anywhere. You can turn any coincidence into proof if you want to. So I tried to check myself constantly, but the more I watched, the more I saw. His desk, through his open door, faced the hallway. Not the window, not a TV, not a bookshelf. The hallway, like he wanted to be in position to hear doors, to know who was moving, to know when she left, when she returned. He seemed to know when her windows were open. I can't even explain that properly, but he'd mention her curtains, the weather, the air, like he had a private connection to her apartment that he shouldn't have had. Once she came home with a heavy package and struggled to get it up the stairs. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't even said anything in the hall. But Paul appeared, smiling, and offered to carry it. It looked kind on the surface, helpful. But the way it happened felt like he'd been waiting for a moment where she'd have to accept him. And she started changing. She came home at different times, not because her life had changed, but because she was trying to be unpredictable. She used the back entrance more often. She stopped lingering in the lobby, checking her mail. She started locking her door faster, checking it twice. She stopped wearing headphones in the hallway like she didn't want to be distracted. That's the thing about situations like this. The impact shows up long before the event people think they need before it counts. A person starts arranging their life around someone else's presence, and it becomes normal so gradually that outsiders don't see it. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. In November, I finally said it out loud to her. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the kind of late-night talk where you can hear the building settle and the pipes click. I told her I didn't think it was harmless anymore. I told her it felt intentional. I told her I was worried. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "I've thought the same thing. I just didn't want to say it." "Why?" I asked. "Because then it's real," she said. "And if it's real, what do I do?" We talked for hours about what you're supposed to do when someone is crossing a line without technically committing a crime. We talked about documenting things, writing down dates, telling building management, going to the police even though we both knew what the police would say if we walked in with My neighbor is watching me. But she hesitated. And I understood why, because the moment you report someone, you have to live with what comes next. You have to deal with retaliation. You have to deal with people calling you dramatic. You have to deal with the idea that you might be wrong and what that wrongness would cost. And again, the trap was the same. He hadn't done anything. Not enough, not provable. And I didn't push her to act. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I might make it worse. I told myself to wait for something clearer. I regret that more than I can explain. Everything changed in January. I wasn't there for the exact moment, but I know enough because Suyan told me the next morning. She came over early, still in her coat, hair damp like she'd showered but couldn't get warm. She sat on my couch like she was afraid to sit too comfortably, like comfort was something she didn't deserve. She'd come home late the night before. Paul was in the hallway. At first it was just conversation. That's how it always started. Him smiling, him being casual, him making it impossible to accuse him of anything without looking paranoid. Then he stepped in front of her door. Not violently, not dramatically, just positioned himself so she couldn't reach her lock without brushing past him. Like it was a small thing. Like it was nothing. He talked. And what he said made it clear how much he knew, how long he'd been watching, details about her schedule, her friends, where she'd been. Things that weren't public, things no neighbor should have any reason to notice, let alone remember. She asked him to move. He didn't. She asked again. And then downstairs, a door opened. Someone heard something. Maybe her voice, maybe the tension in it. Just the sound of another person being awake in the building was enough to break whatever moment Paul thought he had created. He stepped aside like it was all a misunderstanding, like he'd never been blocking her at all. Suyan got inside and locked her door. She told me she sat on the floor for a long time afterward because her legs wouldn't work properly. She said she didn't scream because she didn't want to make a scene, like that was somehow her responsibility, like being loud would make her the problem. It wasn't her. It was him. I went to the building manager that morning. I didn't ask Suyan's permission. I told her I was going, and she looked relieved and terrified at the same time. I explained what had been happening, and for once I didn't soften it. I didn't try to make it sound like maybe nothing. I said he'd been watching. I said he'd been cornering her. I said he'd blocked her from her own door. The next 2 weeks were messy and tense. Conversations in the hallway stopped. People avoided eye contact. There were phone calls, meetings, reports. At one point, I was sure nothing would come of it because that's how these stories go. The person doing harm is always good at appearing harmless. Paul denied everything, of course. He said he was just being friendly. He apologized if she felt uncomfortable. That kind of apology that puts the problem back on the person who spoke up, if you felt, if you misunderstood, if you were sensitive. But something important happened that still surprises me. The building manager believed her. Maybe because he'd seen things too. Maybe because there were enough small complaints that, when lined up, finally looked like a pattern. Maybe because Suyan's fear was so clear it was impossible to dismiss if you weren't trying to. By the end of the month, Paul was gone. There was no big showdown, no dramatic fight in the hallway. Just one day, a moving truck showed up. Boxes went down the stairs. Paul carried things with calm efficiency, like he was leaving for a normal reason, like this was just another life choice and not the result of being forced out by his own behavior. He never looked at me. I never spoke to him. Suyan watched from her window as he left. For a while after that, the building felt lighter. Not magically safe, not perfect, but like a constant pressure had finally stopped pressing. Suyan slept better. She started using the front entrance again. She started laughing more. She was still careful, still changed in small ways, but she wasn't living in that tight, alert state every day. She moved out a few months later, not because of him, not directly. She had other reasons, the kind adults have. Work, timing, opportunity, wanting a different place. We're still close. She built a good life here. She's okay. I want to be clear about that. She's okay. But okay isn't the same as nothing happened. It isn't the same as it couldn't have been worse. And it's definitely not the same as I couldn't have done something sooner. Because I could have. And I didn't. That's the part that keeps coming back when I try to sleep. Not the worst night, not the moving truck, not the manager's office. The earlier moments, the small pauses. The times I felt something was wrong and talked myself out of it because I didn't have a clean, reportable incident. The way I let "he hasn't done anything" become a reason to do nothing. I don't know what to do with that kind of regret. I don't know how to place it somewhere it doesn't sit in my chest like a weight. My therapist says it's complicated. That responsibility isn't always as simple as it feels in hindsight. That I did act eventually, and it mattered. But I still think about that trap, and how many people get caught in it. How many things have to happen before we let ourselves call them what they are. And how many people get hurt while everyone waits for enough. Story 6. For weeks, I had the steady feeling that something was watching me. I couldn't have explained it if you'd asked. I couldn't have pointed to a shape in the trees or a sound in the brush and said, "There, that's it." It was just a sense of eyes on my back whenever I was outside. If whatever it was hadn't eventually made itself known in a way I couldn't ignore, I might have lived the rest of my life half convinced I'd imagined it. It was early spring, the kind of early spring where the days start to brighten, but the mornings still bite cold, and the ground is more mud than soil. I spent most of my time outside doing chores, feeding chickens, checking on the goats, milking cows, carrying buckets, fixing small fence problems, moving things that always seemed to need moving on a farm. And almost every time I was out there, I'd feel it, just behind me. Never close enough that I could hear breathing, never loud enough to make the grass move. Just present. Like the air itself had shifted in a way my body understood, even if my mind didn't. I'd be sitting on my milking stool and suddenly feel that pressure between my shoulder blades, the instinct that makes you turn around fast because something is there. I'd whip my head around, sometime with chicken feed already in my hand, ready to throw it at whatever stray animal I expected to see. A cat, a loose dog, maybe a coyote keeping its distance. But there was never anything there. Not once did I actually catch it. That almost made it worse. If you see something, you can deal with it. You can name it. You can tell yourself it's normal. But when there's nothing there and you still feel watched, your brain starts to turn on you. It starts offering explanations you don't want. I told myself it was nerves. Living alone will do that. I moved out here after my husband died. The farm was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where I could keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. On the days it didn't, I figured my imagination was just looking for something to worry about. Then, about 3 weeks after I first started feeling those eyes, I found the dead goat. Her name was Myrtle. She was one of my older goats, one I'd had since I first moved out here. She wasn't a problem goat. If you've ever kept goats, you know some of them act like they were born with spite in their bones. Myrtle wasn't like that. She had a calm temperament and a steady routine. She wasn't what people would call a butter goat. Not the friendliest thing on 4 legs, but she was generally easy. She let you do what you needed to do without turning it into a wrestling match. That morning, I walked out to the paddock to milk and check on some new kids that had been born. And Myrtle was lying dead in the middle of the pen. The other goats were avoiding her. Not just stepping around her like animals do when something's in their way. They were giving her space, forming a wide circle, keeping their heads down and their bodies tense like they didn't want to get too close. Like they knew something had happened there that still felt dangerous. When I got closer, my stomach clenched hard. Myrtle had been ripped open from throat to groin. The cut wasn't neat. It looked torn. Something had opened her up like it was peeling fruit, and something had eaten part of her. Not a nibble. A real bite taken out. As if the animal that did it had been hungry and unafraid. I stood there staring until my eyes started watering. I knew we had coyotes in the area. Everyone does. There were feral dogs, too, which are worse in some ways because they don't hunt to eat the way wild animals do. They kill because they can. But I'd never had anything like this happen on my property. I didn't want to be the new widow out on a farm calling the sheriff over a dead goat. So I called my neighbor instead. Mr. Ward lived more than 2 miles east of me. He was a big, older man who'd been in the area since just after World War II. He helped me sometimes, not in a pushy way, not in the way some men do when they see a woman alone and decide they need to be her protector. He helped like a neighbor is supposed to help. If I had a question, he answered. If I needed something heavy moved, he showed up without making it weird. He came over and looked at Myrtle. He didn't take long. He crouched near the body, studied the wound, and shook his head as if he'd been expecting this. Yep, he said. Looks like coyotes got her. Coyotes? I asked. I haven't seen any coyotes around this year. Well, it's still early, he said. It's barely been spring for 2 weeks. They've probably been close to their den. Most of them have new pups. Food's just waking up for the season. He stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. My advice is repellent. Do you have any? I told him I had a little left from last year. He shook his head like I'd said I had a half-melted ice cube in a heat wave. That won't do. He left and came back about an hour later with a sack of something that smelled like it had crawled out of the earth and died. The second he opened it, the smell hit so hard I actually stepped back. What is that? I asked, trying not to breathe too deeply. He puffed up with pride. Old family recipe, he said. Mothballs, sulfur, black pepper, and some other things. Coyotes won't want it in their nostrils. He told me coyotes have sensitive noses, and most of them would avoid my land if I sprinkled this around the outside property line. He said I wouldn't have much trouble after that. I thanked him, took the sack, and did exactly what he said. The stuff stank so badly my eyes burned. It clung to my clothes and hair. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd rolled around inside a chemical plant. But I told myself it was worth it if it kept predators away. I was sad about Myrtle. I really was. But I also told myself she was older, and she probably didn't have many winters left anyway. I told myself it wasn't one of the younger goats, the ones I'd just spent money on. I hated thinking like that, hated putting value on them in a cold way, but grief makes you practical sometimes. A couple of days later, it felt like I was trapped in a loop. I walked out to the goat pen and found another goat dead in the middle of the paddock. Same kind of damage. Throat torn, body opened, meat missing. I stood there staring at the repellent line I'd sprinkled and felt something hot rise behind my ribs, anger mixed with fear. If Mr. Ward's family recipe was that strong and this still happened, then either it didn't work at all or whatever was doing this didn't care. I called him again, expecting him to be surprised. He laughed like it was nothing. Like I'd told him, a raccoon got into the trash. Sometimes that happens, he said. Nothing to get too concerned about. Just bring your goats in at night. Coyotes mostly work after dark. I hated the idea. My goats liked sleeping outside. They'd pile up under the open sky like they belonged there. But I figured they'd like being alive more. So I started bringing them into the barn at night. For a little while, things got better. Then I noticed damage to the side of the goat barn. Coyotes dig. I'd heard that my whole life. They'll dig under a fence, dig under a door, whatever they can do. But this didn't look like digging. This looked like something had tried to come through the wall. The wooden boards had deep gouges and splinters, like claws had worked at them again and again. Whatever did it had made real progress. I stood there in the daylight, tracing the scratches with my eyes and felt my skin prickle. I drove to the hardware store and bought sheet metal. I reinforced the wall with it, screwing it in as tightly as I could, hoping that whatever was outside would hit it and give up. Through all of this, the feeling of being watched never fully went away. If anything, it got worse. Sometimes I'd catch something in my peripheral vision, a shape that wasn't a chicken or a goat or a shadow, something low and wrong at the edge of the field. When I turned my head, it was gone, always gone. Like it was smart enough to stay just outside the moment where I could confirm it was real. I started worrying it might be a wolf or some sick animal with mange or rabies. When you live out here, you learn that sickness can make wild animals act strange. You learn that rabies doesn't always look like foam and snarling the way people imagine. Sometimes it's just an animal that won't leave. An animal that gets too close. An animal that seems fearless. Mostly I worried about it biting me. Mr. Ward was my closest neighbor, and he was 2 miles away. If something got me out in the yard, there'd be no one to hear it. The thought of getting bitten and needing rabies shots was bad enough. The thought of getting bitten and not making it to help in time was worse. So I started carrying my gun with me. It was an old shotgun that had belonged to my husband. Holding it felt strange, like a piece of his life still had weight in my hands. But it gave me comfort. It made me feel less alone. That was also around the time the dreams started. I don't usually put much stock in dreams. I've had normal grief dreams and stress dreams like anyone else. But these weren't random. They had a pattern to them, like they were trying to show me something. In the dreams, I was always doing chores. Feeding the chickens, milking the cows, washing dishes at the sink, walking between the barn and the house with buckets in my hands. And always, something followed me. I never looked directly at it, not fully. I'd catch it at the edges of my vision, a canine shape, but wrong. Like a big dog, but its legs were too long. Not just long, but absurdly long. The kind of limbs you'd see in a child's drawing where proportions don't matter. It moved on those legs in a way that almost looked silly, like it didn't belong in a real world where bones and joints have limits. But the longer I watched it out of the corner of my eye, the less funny it felt. It felt patient. It felt focused. I'd wake up tense, like my muscles had been braced all night. After a few nights of that, I started looking for it during the day, too. I'd scan the tree line. I'd stare at the edges of my pasture. I'd watch the gaps between buildings. I never saw it clearly, but I kept feeling like it was close, like it was learning me. I got jumpy. I started flinching at small sounds. My thoughts stayed tight and quick, like they were always racing to keep up with danger I couldn't see. It wore me down. It made my days feel longer and my nights feel shorter. A long time ago, after my husband died, I had a problem with drinking. It crept up on me slowly, then hit hard. It took me a couple years to really see what I was doing and get it under control. I hadn't touched a bottle in almost a decade. After the dream started, I bought one. It should have felt like a failure, like falling backward. But if I'm being honest, it felt like relief, like I needed something to dull the sharp edge of my fear, even if I knew it was a bad way to do it. Mr. Ward started stopping by more often around then. I think he could see it on me, even when I tried to act normal. He'd show up with a reason, a tool he said I might need, a question about my fence line, a bag of feed he claimed he'd bought too much of. He didn't hover, but he checked on me in a steady way that made it hard to pretend I was fine. One afternoon, he invited me over for dinner. We ate at his kitchen table with the radio playing quietly in the background. When we finished, he poured coffee and studied me over the rim of his mug. "You sleeping all right?" he asked. "Your eyes look like you haven't had a good night since before Trump got in office." I laughed, because it was easier than saying no. I told him I'd been having weird dreams lately, but it was probably nothing. He didn't laugh. He sipped his coffee and kept looking at me like he was deciding whether to say something. "My grandma used to tell me a story when I was a kid," he said finally, "about a creature that gives people bad dreams. I ever tell you about it?" I shook my head. Mr. Ward wasn't a storytelling type. He didn't talk just to hear himself talk. If he was bringing up some old tale, it meant something to him. "Grandma always said there was a creature that attached itself to people and swallowed their soul while they slept," he said. "Called it the Laramie or something close. Nasty thing. Took the shape of a big dog or a coyote. It would stalk people and wear them down in their sleep until there was nothing left. Then it would either get bored and move on, or it would drain them dry." I tried to smile, tried to make it a joke. I told him it sounded like his grandma had the same taste in scary kids' stories that mine did. He didn't smile back. The Laramie can only be run off by ignoring it completely, he said. You can't acknowledge it. It feeds on fear, feeds on you noticing it. You turn your back on it, and you keep living like it isn't there. Otherwise, it'll find you and take what it wants. I asked if his coyote repellent worked on the Laramie, too, trying to lighten the mood. He still didn't laugh. I'd take it serious, he said. Grandma claimed she had a great aunt drained dry by it. Started with bad dreams, then paranoia. Then one night she went to bed, and she just never woke up. I nodded, thanked him, and went home telling myself it was just a folk story. A way to explain sleep paralysis or nightmares or anxiety before people had better words for it. Nobody truly believes a spiritual thing is stalking you through dreams, right? I wasn't in a movie. I was a grown woman with livestock and bills and a barn to repair. That night, the dreams changed. I tried hard to keep the name Laramie out of my head. I didn't want to feed it with belief. But in the dream, the creature followed me again, closer now, and it started whispering. At first, I couldn't make out the words. It stayed just behind me, not fully in view, and the whisper was low enough that it sounded like wind through grass. But no matter what I was doing in the dream, it got closer and closer until it felt like it was right behind my neck. I could feel heat there, breath, the sensation of something standing too close. I'd be washing dishes at the sink, hands in soapy water, and I'd feel it behind me. I'd be feeding the chickens and feel it behind me. I'd be walking across the yard with a bucket and feel it behind me. I still didn't look directly at it. I tried to do what Mr. Ward said. I kept my eyes forward. I kept moving. I acted like it didn't exist, even though every part of me wanted to turn and face it. Now that it was closer, I could tell more about it from the corner of my vision. It was probably a coyote, at least in shape, but those legs were wrong. Too long, too thin, like noodles holding up a body that should have collapsed. It moved like something pretending to be an animal, like it had watched coyotes enough to copy the idea, but not enough to get the details right. It whispered, and my anxiety climbed higher each night, and I kept trying to ignore it until the dream ended, and I woke up shaking. It went on like that for 3 or 4 nights. Each dream felt endless. Not like a normal nightmare where you wake up after a rush of fear, but like being trapped inside a long day that never ends. I would wake up exhausted, like I'd been running all night. During the day, I'd stumble through chores with my nerves stretched tight, waiting for dusk. Then, on the last night I saw it, the dream changed again. This time, it didn't stay directly behind me. It started drifting to the side, still not fully in view, but letting me know it was there, trying to tempt my eyes toward it. And it wasn't whispering anymore. It started saying my name. At first, it sounded almost like it was testing the word, shaping it in a mouth that didn't belong to a person. It hadn't done that before. It had never been that direct. Hearing it made my blood feel cold. I kept my face forward. I kept washing dishes in the dream like my hands were on autopilot, like the only thing that mattered was not reacting. As the dream went on, it got more agitated. My name got louder. Not a whisper, not a soft call, a deep, guttural sound, like an animal trying to force a human word through a throat built for growls. The way it said it made my skin crawl. I dropped a plate in the dream. It shattered in the sink with a sharp crack. I had to bend down to pick up the pieces, moving slowly, terrified that any sudden motion would count as acknowledgement. It circled just out of sight. I could feel it to my right, then behind, then left, like it was trying to get in front of me, trying to catch my eyes, and then it shouted, "Mackenzie!" The voice was wrong, too deep, too thick, like the name was being barked. My lips started trembling. I could feel my face preparing to scream. Every nerve in my body begged me to whip around and face it, like that would end the pressure. But I didn't. I kept my eyes forward. I kept breathing. I acted like I hadn't heard anything at all. For a long moment it stayed there, furious, calling my name again and again. And I held myself so still I felt like I might break. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the dream ended. I jolted awake in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering like I'd been running. The room was dark and quiet. Nothing moved, no sound but my own breathing. And that was the last night I ever saw the creature. The next day, I told Mr. Ward. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said I'd gotten lucky. He said most people didn't survive their encounter with the Laramie. He told me to be careful in the future, because it could come back if I ever gave it an opening. It hasn't come back the way it did then. No dead goats since I reinforced the barn. No fresh claw marks. No clear shape at the edge of my field. But sometimes, in the quiet part of a dream, I'll feel that old pressure again. Not the full terror, not the voice, just the sense that something is there, waiting at the edge of my vision, watching to see if I'll turn my head. And every time I feel it, I force myself to look straight ahead, even in sleep, because now I know the worst part isn't seeing it. The worst part is letting it know you see it too.